Hi there, it's Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder here with this week's episode of the Market Monday. So today we're going to talk about the banned and restricted announcement that came out today, and maybe we'll even delve a little more into the impact on the mystery booster boxes, how I think that they are going to pan out financially. So let's start out with the banned and restricted announcement today. It was announced that the following cards in formats that it matters, so we can skip through Brawl and Historic, is going to be Legacy, Underworld Breach is banned, and Modern Once Upon a Time is banned. We're also going to talk about Pioneer having no ban list and see exactly where I think the meta is going to shift for that particular format. So why is this important? This is why I think that if you're going to be investing in singles, that you need to be a player or at least be very familiar with the meta, as well as the way that things are shifting. And there's some good websites out for that, and we'll talk about one of them today. First of all, let's just take a look at the Modern metagame. We had the banning in the Modern being Once Upon a Time is actually very significant. And now is my good time to kind of rub in everyone's face and say, I told you so, I told you so, I told you so. This is one of the cards when it was previewed that I said would end up getting banned in every format because it was just such a busted card with having alternative mana costs and just having exactly what formats like Modern wants, which is reduction of variance. Anything that can give you that reduced variance, that can have those broken starts, is absolutely going to see a lot of play in their respective formats. It's kind of what Gitaxian Probe did. I know Gitaxian Probe also was a free spell, but it also did just really thin out your deck of being able to play less land drops, as well as have you be able to keep hands that might be low on lands or whatnot, just because you can rely on that Gitaxian Probe. Once Upon a Time was the exact same thing. You could easily keep like a 2-lander with Once Upon a Time, because Once Upon a Time will find you that third land, and it will, or if you have a heavy land hand, you could also keep Once Upon a Time because it could go get, hopefully within the 5 cards will find you the key piece for what you're looking for in that as well. So it's been banned in Standard, it's been banned in Pioneer, and now it is banned in Modern, which was no surprise because it was starting to show about a 40% dominant, and it was in 2 decks that were very problematic for the format that would continue to get more and more dominant. The first being the Eldrazi Tron. Eldrazi Tron was even cutting things like Ancient Stirrings or Expedition maps because they could rely on the Once Upon a Time, or even like Sylvan Scrying. There'd be some number of those 3 that were cut for a full package Once Upon a Time. If we actually look at the deck here, you can see these lists were using Once Upon a Time. Now, this one wasn't even running Ancient Stirrings, so that's the one it decided to cut, is Once Upon a Time for Ancient Stirrings, and that's a pretty significant power. Like, if Tron isn't using Ancient Stirrings, that it has been a mainstay for Tron for a long time. So it already made like a deck that I would say is on the watch list already for things that need to be kept in check before Tron gets out of hand. And Once Upon a Time, with the consistency that it provided for that free spell, allowed the deck to really be pushed over the top. I mean, that's where this deck really shines, or Once Upon a Time really shines, is in decks like Eldrazi Tron or Amulet Titan. They can utilize just casting Once Upon a Time for 2 mana and not really be disadvantaged and still have that huge upside of being able to look through 5 cards. But Once Upon a Time was also seeing in play in decks that weren't really wanting to cast Once Upon a Time because, like I said before, it just really helped with consistency. So Eldrazi Tron and Amulet Titan will probably go back to pre Once Upon a Time versions, and both of them were definitely not as dominant as they are now. They do get more interesting because one of the reasons they weren't more dominant, cards have been banned like Mox Opal since then, which made these decks actually more effective, because those were some of the worst matchups for like Tron and Amulet Titan were the Mox Opal decks, whether it be Affinity, whether it be Urza Tron or Urza Opal. Those ones were preying on decks like Amulet Titan, Eldrazi Tron. So I don't know where it's going to end up after the banning, but it's going to leave a lot of room for decks that had horrible matchups versus Amulet Titan and Eldrazi Tron. So let's go ahead and take a look at that before we shift over to Pioneer. So I have, this is called mtgmeta.io, is the have up here in the address bar, mtgarena.io, and you can mess with like the date ranges. And so I've got the data that's good from early year before the Urza Tron was banned, and all the way into summer of last year. The reason why is there just isn't any data for whatever reason on this particular website from the first or the middle of January to where we're at now. There just wasn't enough tournaments, I guess, for Modern in February to really give you any good data. There was like the most played deck was like 14 matchups, which is just not good data at that point. So anyway, we can take a look at, you got to keep in mind that Amulet Titan probably had very similar lists, because that's the time period that Once Upon a Time came out. I don't think there's anything from Theros that actually changed these decks, with the exception of Amulet Titan did get the Dryad, but I don't know if the Dryad's really that much better than some of the other cards they were using beforehand. But anyway, Once Upon a Time, though, is going to be very relevant for these two particular matchups. So if you see Amulet Titan had about a 54% win rate. One of its worst matchups, I believe, was Urza. Urza's Ascendancy was really, really terrible and that was using Mox Opal at 36% win percentage. So one of the reasons why the Amulet Titan's already been getting better and better and better is one of its worst matches with both these Urza Ascendancy and Urza Sword got the Banhammer with Mox Opal and definitely aren't performing as well as they were. Teamer Urza is about a 50%, which again is good for a deck if that's one of the matchups you don't have to go against. And some of these other decks that it has been doing really well at is where I'm going to really focus on, that could get a lot better now with Amulet Titan going back to where it was pre Once Upon a Time. So if we start seeing less Amulet Titan, the ones in green are going to be the decks that have a lot of chance to go up in value. The cards are contained to them. For the first one being Bogles, not really statistically relevant with 75% win percentage with only 4 matchups, but I can tell you Amulet Titan does do well versus Bogles, because Bogles just isn't going to have that steam to outperform Amulet Titan before Amulet Titan goes off. It doesn't matter how many enchantments you hook up, Amulet Titan is pretty good at playing against the Bogles route, especially if they are running something like Blast Zone in the main, where they can actually tutor that up and actually get rid of all the enchantments. And that's, I would assume that this is pretty relevant data for Bogles versus Amulet Titan, that's going to be very, very similar, 75% win rate for the Amulet Titan. Next one is Dredge. I think this gets a little more statistically relevant with 81.8% win rate with 11 matchups. Yeah, this is where Dredge is pretty poorly positioned right now in the Modern, just because there still is quite a bit of graveyard hate, and it's getting hated out by that. Dredge typically does well when the graveyard hate is not very prevalent. There isn't like a good like Living End deck. I don't think Living End's seeing play, but like Jun's not like on a heavy graveyard based strategy either, and that way they can just really slip in and win a lot of matches with the lack of graveyard hate. However, between that and then also being Tron and Amulet Titan are actually really good versus Dredge, and you can see what's kind of going bad for Dredge at the moment. Even though if we look down here, what did Dredge have as far as win percentage? Had about a right across the board win percentage at 50%. So Dredge is really well positioned with Amulet Titan getting the nerf to be more of a tier deck again. Eldrazi Tron is pretty much a wash, because they also are getting their Once Upon a Time banned, and it's going to come back down. The decks, of course, that are going to get worse after this is banned, you got to think that it hurts decks that do well against these particular ones. So something like Gift Storm, that usually went off a little bit earlier, a little more consistently than Amulet Titan, might, I actually don't know if this is relevant either, because they seem pretty much 50-50 in which one's going to go off on like turn 3, turn 4 against that matchup. But other things like Grixis Death Shadow, that's pretty statistically relevant to 25 matchups, only 60% win percentage, so Grixis Death Shadow gets a lot better. Jund, with 28 matchups, gets much, much better. Mono Red Prowess gets much, much better, and the Death Shadow Traverse version also gets much, much better, and it's pretty much a wash across the board with many of these other decks. Bant Snowblade does get rid of one of its favorite matchups, though, with Amulet Titan. So let's go ahead and look at Eldrazi Tron and see what Eldrazi Tron's bad matchups are. Or good matchups. Again, this is a deck that preys on Bogles. It's a deck that probably preys on Dredge. It didn't have any matchups here, it looks like. No, I'm looking at Dredge. Nope, it actually says it had a bad matchup versus Dredge. I wonder why that is. I guess it's just a turn slower, and that's all it needs for Dredge to come back from Eldrazi Tron. You'd think it'd be a pretty decent matchup, though, with like if they're running like Oblivion Stone, but possibly Dredge just has too much of like the creeping chills to really grind them out. Possibly that's what it is versus because Eldrazi Tron just doesn't win the game when it kind of goes or ramps off, where I guess Amulet Titan does, and maybe that's the difference in between the matchups. So possibly Dredge doesn't get better because of this matchup getting maybe less of a meta share. Gift Storm didn't do well against Eldrazi Tron. That's also interesting to me that Amulet Titan and Gift Storm have such a big difference. But again, this was statistically irrelevant, but this one is relevant at 66%. We have the Mono Red Prowess, again, is a bad matchup versus Tron. Even things like Infect or Humans, these things have unfavorable matchups. But the one I really want to showcase is Bogles. Both these decks were very, very tough for Bogles. It looks like it might be well positioned now if the meta goes back to more of like the Jund and the Bant Spirits and those type of decks, more of the fair-based decks where Bogles can really come in and prey on. Or I know Azorius Control is really big. It's one of the most played decks when both the Amulet Titan and the Troner are low, because I believe those are pretty terrible matchups for Azorius Control. It looks like it does very well against Titan. What does it do versus Tron? It says Azorius Control actually does good versus Tron, but I thought Tron decks were definitely built to beat Control. I could be wrong there. Alrighty, so that is where I'd start to look at with the meta. So let's take a look at kind of what's going on in the modern meta at the moment. So that Prowess Blitz, is currently the second most played deck. This could definitely be a target. You can see the number 1 and number 2 currently are Eldrazi Tron and Amulet Titan. And we already said that Jund and Mono Red Blitz had terrible matchups versus both of these. So I'd expect like Mono Red Blitz to start to have more of a meta share. Let's take a look and see what Mono Red Blitz does against like other. So I think they call this one Prowess. So Mono Red Prowess. So its worst matchup, Amulet Titan is pretty bad. Some of its other bad matchups are Bogles. If this actually starts seeing more of a meta share, Bogles could definitely come into prey on those. It does pretty terrible versus Dredge. Doesn't do very well against Eldrazi Tron, which we established, which is going to get much better if Once Upon a Time is banned, which it is. Doesn't do well against Humans. Does very well against Grixis Death Shadow, which we already assumed is going to start getting more of a meta share. Does really well against Infect, which Infect didn't perform very well against either one of the two Once Upon a Time decks. And the other ones, though, when you start getting down into some of these, where these aren't the most relevant statistics. I guess Tron, we should have just looked at Tron rather than... Was I looking at the wrong Tron to begin with? No, so Eldrazi... Yes, I was looking at Eldrazi Tron. So let's scratch that and go back over to Tron. Why is I looking at Eldrazi Tron? I know Eldrazi Tron sometimes can run. So this Eldrazi Tron does really good against Azorius Control. That's where I messed up here. So it does very well against that. Does very well against Bogles. So same thing there. Does very, very well 50-50 versus Dredge. Yeah, I knew that wasn't like such a lopsided matchup like I thought. Does very, very well against the Eldrazi Tron. And does great against Jund, Humans, Grixis Death Shadow. So it is kind of bad versus like Infect, which, that really preys on life gain. One of their ways of Tron stabilizing is life gain. And then it is, pretty across the board with some of these that don't have the most statistics to compare them up against. So there we go. Now we have a better picture of where the meta is going to be. So that's kind of my prediction with how the meta is going to shift. So a good thing to do, and maybe we'll do a follow-up video on the Rogue Market channel of cards that I think have the potential of going up. Now, the big one is if you can find something that's like a Pioneer card that has a potential of continue its trajectory going up just because it's being played in Pioneer, those are the ones I'm going to look at. So even cards like Skullscar Mage, this one is really interesting because it's flatlined out again. This is because the supply is so high about this card. But if it starts to see a double dipping in both Pioneer and Modern, we're going to have a Modern season, we're going to have a Pioneer season. So that's really good for these double dipping cards because they never go really out of season they're going to continue to see play, and if people can get them from a Pioneer deck and a Modern deck, of course that's going to help the longevity of the card. So Soulscar Mage is a card that I like at its price point at $4. It is a little bit rich because it was in those Challenger decks, but those Challenger decks are finally over and done with, and a lot of the other cards from those Challenger decks are going up. And so I'm going to continue to think that Soulscar Mage is going to have this slow but steady increase in price, and if it does start to see more of a share in Modern, you can see that actually start to speed up. Something that Bedlam Reveler is always interesting in Pioneer. I don't think Pioneer is quite ready for it because it's not as easy to fill up the graveyard as it is in Modern. And Monstrous Whisperer just keeps on getting reprints. But some of these other cards, not really. I don't think that Manamorphose would be the greatest one to get into right now. It's just really destined for a reprint, in my opinion. Lava Spike, though, could be a definitely good one. And this is a very budget deck. That also could be the reason why people are getting in on this particular deck. The two that are most interesting, though, would be the Mod Horizons. I think Mod Horizons is about being done of its mass supply as far as singles are concerned. There's still a lot of sealed boxes, but I wonder if anyone's actually cracking them because of the negative EV at this time period. So Fire Islet and the Sunbaked Canyon, I think, would be great little investments for Mono Red Blitz if you have faith in Mono Red Blitz. But let's go over to a deck that I think has a very, very good chance to go up. Let's try to find a Bogles list. Bant Snowblade is another one we can look at. Jund we can look at, but Bogles, if Bogles loses two of its terrible matchups, and Mono Red Blitz and Jund and Bant Snowblade, and a few of these other decks that we consider more of the fair, like Azorius Control, that is typically something where Bogles does well against. So if we look at what is let's say Daybreak Cornet, for example. Daybreak Cornet is a card that is incredibly cheap at the moment because of Urza's Masters. It's or Ultimate Masters. It's still at its lowest point ever at $2.50. So this could be a prime card to go up in value. We can take a look at the entire Bogles list, and it does have a lot of these cards do have overlap with the Pioneer format. Another card I definitely want to take a look at from this deck is Leyline of Sanctity. I think Leyline of Sanctity gets much better when you have a few decks now that are going to start to see a lot more relevance, like Death Shadow and like Jund, now with Once Upon a Time out of the format, where the Eldrazi decks, Leyline of Sanctity was pretty bad in the sideboard if you're going to be going up against Amulet Titan and Tron all day long. But if you're going to be going up against Death Shadow and Jund, then Leyline of Sanctity seems much better to have that first turn, something that can actually stop Thoughtseize from happening. So Leyline of Sanctity is something that also has hit its bottom. It's the lowest it's ever been. It's from Core 2020. Core 2020 recently had a mass box opening because it had positive EV. Well, now this set is now back down to not positive EV, so no one's going to be cracking the booster boxes, and the supply of the booster boxes are definitely not where they were like a month ago. I don't think this set was printed very highly. It was on sale for a while because this was not a very popular set, and then when people figured out the EV was positive, then it started getting cracked, and then that shot back down to where it has negative EV, and now I think we're going to have the chance for especially rares out of course at 2020 to start going up in value. I like this card anyway because Leyline of Sanctity is pretty good right now in the Pioneer meta, and I guess it's pretty terrible right now in the Standard meta. There's just not enough decks that actually target at the moment. Rakdos Sacrifice, I guess, is getting more meta share for Standard at the moment, but I don't know. I don't really think that's where you want to be investing in cards anyway in the Standard format, which is stale at the moment. But those are two good cards in my opinion, being both the Daybreak Cornet and the Leyline of Sanctity, if you start to see more of the Bogles. And this is where this website is definitely going to come in handy, where you can actually filter it by even a more narrow time period, and then you can start to see trends and what decks are really starting to, top 8 or starting to see play. Because I think it gets its data mainly from any decks that it can get data from, and there's going to be more top 8 data than anything because those are the lists that actually show up and are published. So if we go back over again to the meta for Modern, we have the other decks like Jund and Death Shadow and Dredge. Dredge, we have some interesting ones because there are some cards that are pretty low comparatively to where they've been. Like Life from the Loam has been going down. This could be a good time to go back into Life from the Loam. This card does this all the time. Is it in Okay, Secret Lair just had a Life from Loam, so that's probably why it's having its decrease. I just want to say if it was in the mystery boxes, but I don't think that one was. It doesn't show up like it was. But it could be a good time to even get in like Narcomoeba, a card from Guilds of Ravnica that could definitely start going up in value. You'll pick them up for a quarter piece from Card Kingdom. I doubt this card's ever going to get a reprint again because it's hard to put in standard sets. They finally found a place they could put it in, and it's probably been forgotten about for a long time period. So that is my suggestion, is to really, really get familiar with this mtgmeta.io for these results and start to really look at the meta and look at trends and get ahead before these decks start to see. So you will have a delay. So these decks will become popular or start to get more popularity before price increases. There's always a lag in the market unless people are speculating. Speculation happens when usually another card is printed and then people are like, wow, this is going to work with a particular card. And then there's buyouts and things like that. When there's real demand where it's not affected by speculation or emotional driven like that, you'll actually will be able to get ahead of it because markets do move slower. At least the prices do move slower by the time people are picking up the cards, and by the time the market reacts, there's time to get in on those last few copies. Alrighty, so let's move on to Pioneer. Pioneer I've actually set from, we can go to Pioneer and we can actually set it to, let's just do the last month of February to show you exactly how this works. So let's go February 1st to now the 10th of March. And we can see now that the most played deck, we can go by popularity. I guess it doesn't do by popularity. Thought it did. Let's just go back by name. I guess we can look down and see which one. So it looks like Dimir Inverter. And if we go back over to the ban and restricted announcement, they didn't ban anything in Pioneer because they say nothing was showing data out of the norm. The Lotus wasn't doing that great. The Dimir combo wasn't doing that great, especially now that people have adjusted with things like Damping Sphere in the sideboard, and even Helad, Suncrown, and Walking Ballista, even though it did have a positive win percentage, the people were actually winning more from not the combo than they were from the combo. I don't know how they got that statistic, but that is what they're saying, that it attacks on different angles, that it wasn't really the combo that was pushing it, that Mono White Devotion is just a good aggro deck at the moment. Alrighty, so if we go over to the performance of the Pioneer within the last month, you can see that if we actually do sort by performance, popularity-wise, it was going to be the Dimir Inverter Truth and the Bant Spirits that are seeing the most popularity, as well as Sultai Delirium. But it does say that Azorius Spirits is actually better than the banned version of Spirits by quite a big margin. So going into those Shocklands is not really, going into Coco is not actually making Bant Spirits relevant. And you can see in the mirror, the Bant Spirits just overperforms against, Azorius beats the mirror quite steadily, and it actually has good matchups versus ones where Bant Spirit doesn't have good matchups against, which is very interesting. So like Azorius Control versus Azorius Spirits, Azorius Control is very lopsided, Spirits is very lopsided versus Azorius Control, whereas Bant Spirits is actually unfavorable against the Azorius Control. And across the board, it doesn't even look like Bant Spirits is worthwhile playing with a 47% win percentage and really only having an edge. Does it even have an edge in one matchup? It does. Against Mono Red aggro, it's better than the regular Azorius Spirits. Other than that, and then Mono White Heliod it is too. Yeah, so when it needs to go bigger and really grind out, if you're going tit for tat, then the Coco version is better. But they both still have decent matchups versus, well, even look at it, Sultai Delirium, where Azorius Spirits is better than the Bant Spirits. Anyway, that's a whole different subject for today. This is a market one, but I guess it's kind of relevant for that. So you expect Azorius Spirits to actually gain more steam when it is showcasing some pretty decent matchups with a 53% win percentage versus Dimir Inverter, and it does really good against Lotus Breach, extremely good versus Lotus Breach, whereas Bant Spirits is just kind of meh. So the cards of Azorius Spirits, I think, are going to start going up just because this is having a good win percentage. It does show that Lotus Breach does also have a 56% win percentage plus a lot of popularity, and it does extremely well versus Azorius Control, Mono Black Aggro, and both of the Mono White Devotion / Mono White Heliod, which are basically the same deck, and very good against like Niv Delight and Sultai Inverter. Where it struggles is against the Dimir inverter, it has, actually it's a favorable matchup, but it struggles versus Sultai Delirium that has also been able to pick up steam and has been struggling versus Mono Red aggro. So both of those with Lotus Breach sticking in the meta, I'm assuming that Mono Red aggro, which we just talked about for Modern, those cards are going to gain a lot more popularity to beat the Mono Red, or to beat the Lotus Breach. The other popular one that did not get a ban is Sultai Delirium, and you can see that this also has actually has a very favorable matchup versus Mono Red aggro. So it looks like we're gonna have like a rock paper scissors format for a while until they can figure out what to do with Pioneer. I personally don't think that Dig Through Time or the Underworld Breach are going to be good long term. That they're eventually going to have to be banned. So they might as well rip the band-aid off right now. With more cards entering into the format, those are going to be two problematic cards going forward. And I think that comparatively speaking, it already got banned in Legacy, the Underworld Breach, and it's most likely will have to get banned eventually in Modern, in my opinion. I mean, it's really doing what Past in Flames does at a cheaper, pretty much a cheaper cost at that point. So I wouldn't be surprised if some deck breaks it in Modern eventually. So I don't know. That's my opinion, that they should just rip the Band-Aid off and get rid of the card. But who am I? I guess that they're not going to do anything. They've had enough bans in the Pioneer format, and they want to leave it alone for a while. So we can look at other decks too that are kind of popular choices, but may not be doing well. Something I'd expect like Niv Delight to continue to go down because it just doesn't seem to have any relevant favorable matchups. It's favorable versus like Azorius Control, and it's favorable versus Mono Black Aggro, which are both on the down swing. Something like Is It and Soul just doesn't have much statistic relevance, but it does terrible versus Lotus Breach. I mean, anything right now that I think that Lotus Breach is going to prey on is just a bad one to invest in at the moment. So anything out of Azorius Control, where you got both these Spirits decks and Dimir, I guess Dimir Inverter though does bad against Azorius Control, but it's not terrible. But Lotus Breach just eats it up. So that would be my suggestion, is the decks that Lotus Breach beats up, I wouldn't invest in them right now. The decks that beats up Lotus Breach, I would start looking as potential investments. So both Azorius Spirits and Mono Red Aggro would be the two ones that I definitely take a look at. So let's go ahead and do that real quickly and see so decks, metagame, and see exactly what they're running and see if there's anything that sticks out. You can see that the Goldfish has a little bit different data than the data. Well, it's combining the two, Mono White Devotion and Mono White Heliod, which if we go back here, if we add the two together, what does that actually bring it to? Wow, yeah. So it would give the Mono White Heliod, and where do they have Devotion in on here for it? Well, they have Mono White Devotion and Mono White Heliod, but then they don't have, then they're not showing Devotion. Weird. Okay, anyway, so there's got to be some number that just didn't get put in but got put in for this particular slot. I don't know exactly how it works for the website. But you can see that Mono Green Walkers, was that even a thing when we were looking at the performance? Yeah, I'm not even seeing Mono Green. I wonder if did they call this, instead of this one being Mono White, be Mono Green Devotion? I wonder if that's it. I don't know. Maybe there's some misnaming here, and that's why it's not coming up on the... I don't know. Someone in the comment section tell me where it went wrong. If we go back over, though, you can see that the Mono Red Aggro, we want to take a look at that, and we wanted to look at... Let's just try to take a look at maybe a Pioneer League and see. Here we go. We'll look at Pioneer League and see if we can see a Spirits list that has been, doing Azorius Spirits. Okay, so take a look at Spirits, and let's take a look at this red deck. So Spirits, it looks like Spellcaller is well positioned again to going up in price. It also does see a 4 of play in the Bant version, but I think the biggest difference between Azorius and the Bant Spirits is going to be, so Supreme, Phantom, Selfless Spirits, Rattle Chains, those are all the same. So is it going to be in things like the 1-drops, or is it going to be like Nebelgeist Herald just gets cut and then more like Brazen Borrowers? Is that what I'm seeing here? So Teferi is a big difference, so it has more counter magic with like Teferi and Mystical Dispute, and they also get this Imperial Eagle. And I didn't see, yeah, the Bant one's actually using that. So actually 32 creatures, 32 creatures. So it's a wash. So the big difference, I guess, is just running a counterspell versus Collected Company. And is it really worth it at that point for Collected Company when you're just trying to tempo with this list? And I think that I kind of agree with these Azorius ones currently in the meta, that waiting for that 4 is probably, or the Collected Company is probably not getting a big enough boost, with the downside of those shock lands and lands coming into play tapped that might actually hurt your tempo, where you definitely have just a better, smoother mana base with the Azorius. And I kind of agree with this. So cards like Teferi Time Raveler, long term would be a great one for the Azorius Spirits. Spell Queller, of course. All of these are used in both of them, and they all have the, I mean, if you add the two together, Azorius Spirits and the Bant Spirits, this is definitely the number one played deck. So Rattle Chains right off the back looks very, very underpriced. So I'm expecting Rattle Chains to start going up in value. And it's in this, Mausoleum Wanderer was in Eldritch. Yeah, they're both in pre-constructed decks, though, I believe. So Rattle Chains, I don't think will get hurt too much from that, because this one was in the I believe this was in the red-blue pre-constructed deck during Eldritch Moon, and this was in the Spirits one. I think, yeah, there definitely was an intro deck that was a Spirits that Rattle Chain was in. So the supply is a little bit higher for Rattle Chains than Mausoleum Wanderer, but this still seems like a pretty budget card that is seeing this much play in the meta, arguably the number one deck. The other one that's interesting is this Imperial Eagle, because there are plenty of cards from the Core 2020, especially uncommons, that have been able to shoot up in value. So if you go over to uncommons from Core 2020, you can see there's 5-3. Well, that one you can't look at. Some of these are the same one, like Aether Gust, Noxious Grasp, Fry, even things like Seasons. I guess Imperial Eagle. Where is Imperial Eagle on this? Why isn't it even showing up in the uncommons? Is it a 2019? Oh, is it a 2019 that I'm looking at? No, it's 2020. Where's the Eagle? There it is. Oh, it's 44 cents. Yeah, I guess that's about right where like Spectral Sailor and Season of Growth is, but I don't know. These ones I think are pretty well poised if they are Pioneer times 4 in the number one deck to actually see a higher amount of money going forward. And especially if it doesn't get knocked out of its slot, this one is probably the most jeopardized one. With Spirits, it gives all your flying creatures +1/+1. I guess it does pump the Brazen Borrower, so it actually would take a bigger Lord to, knock this one off. You actually do like this one. I like this one a lot as its price point. I wonder if something else is keeping this down. Was it in the Planeswalker deck? Some of the comment section can definitely weigh in on this. But this one's a decent spec, and I also like the Rattle Chains as a spec for the Azorius Spirits, and of course Spell Queller still to me seems a little bit underrated for a rare that sees a ton of play from Eldritch Moon in the Pioneer format in many other decks besides just the Spirits versions of these decks. So let's go over these mono red prowess, the mono red decks. Red decks can go a couple of different ways. This one looks like it went a Goblin way. Let's see if we can find some overlap with the Pioneer decks for. Let's see. Let's just go back over to Pioneer and see if we can find some mono red prowess, mono red aggro, see what they're really running here. So the one that really sticks out to me right off the bat is going to be against Soulscar Mage, having the double dipping from Pioneer. Chain Whirlers are pretty low, other than they were included in the Challenger decks. And these ones also are looking like they do run Eidolon of the Great Revel, which is really good versus if you're going to have some action versus things like Lotus Storm and some of the other matchups. And maybe that's what's really putting over the top versus Lotus Storm is the Eidolon. So this one does seem pretty good. It's also a double dipper with Burn in Modern, which Burn looks well positioned. Again, if Jund and Death Shadow are going to be decks that are going to be legit tier 1 decks now that Amulet Titan and Tron get pushed down, yeah, then Burn actually does look a lot more legit. So that'd be my pick from the mono red aggro would definitely be the Soulscar Mage and the Eidolon, mainly due to the fact they have the double dipping with Modern, and the ones out of the Azorius deck would definitely be the Bird as well as the Rattle Chains. So anyway, we've kind of rambled off on theorying, but I hope you get something from this video. This is exactly how my thought process works. I know this isn't scripted and I'm all over the place, but when I'm looking for specs, especially in these particular formats, and we're trying to get ahead on things, it's data, data is king. A lot of time the market will move a lot quicker with like speculation and emotion, but if you can get ahead of emotion and speculation with sheer data, eventually the market will catch up with sheer data. It's meaning those cards are being stripped from the supply when people are actually building these decks and posting these decks, and eventually it catches back up. So hope you enjoyed this video. This has been Kevin with the Rogue Deck Builder. Maybe we'll have a follow-up video for the top 10 cards that I would invest in post-banning for the Pioneer, and, well, I guess Pioneer didn't have a banning, but, you know, since things didn't get banned, and for Modern. I'm not going to really look at Legacy, because Legacy right now is a little bit all over the place, regardless of a ban list. It hasn't had the greatest showing either in the past year, so maybe for another video we'll actually take a look at Legacy. Anyway, this has been Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder. Thanks for watching.